Let's turn now to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 17 and verse 22. And while they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised again on the third day." And they were deeply grieved. Again, Jesus speaks to them about the cross. But this time Peter does not say, "Let it not happen to you, Lord," because he's learned his lesson, that the voice that tells us to avoid the way of the cross is the voice of Satan. They were grieved, but they kept quiet. And when they came to Capernaum, verse 24, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax?" This was the tax for the temple, and they were wondering whether Jesus, who was establishing new principles compared to the law of Moses, was also not going to pay the tax for that temple. And when they asked Peter, Peter said, of course, he's going to pay it. Yes, he didn't consult the Lord. And very often we're like that too, to give a quick answer before seeking God's will. And when he came into the house, before Peter could say a word, Jesus knew already what the people outside had come for and what Peter had replied through the supernatural revelation of the Spirit. Jesus spoke to Peter first, it says in verse 25, and said, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers?" And upon this saying, upon Peter saying from strangers, Jesus said to him, "Well, then the sons are exempt. The sons don't have to pay tax. For after all, in any nation, if a king collects taxes, he collects taxes from the people of the nation. He doesn't collect tax from his own son." And here was a tax being collected for that temple, which was the house of God. And Jesus takes his position there as the Son of God and says, if this tax is really being collected for the Father, why should I, who am the Son, pay this tax? I am free. I don't have to pay the tax for the house of my own Father. But, he said, even though I have that freedom as the Son of God, I will not exercise that freedom. And this is another fundamental New Covenant principle. This is the way of the cross. That though I have freedom, I don't exercise that freedom. For the sake of others, I deny myself. And here Jesus says in verse 27, lest we give them offense, lest we cause them to stumble. In other words, he was denying himself for the sake of others. He was not exercising his right and his privilege as the Son of God because he did not want to offend others. Remember this, dear brothers and sisters, that the highest Christian life is where we deny ourselves our rights and privileges for the sake of others, to bring others to blessing, to bring others into the kingdom, to prevent others from stumbling. We deny ourselves our rights. Jesus said in John 17, for their sakes I sanctify myself. John 17:19. He set himself apart. He gave up certain privileges and rights for the sake of others. And we see an example of that here. Even for the sake of others who were not his disciples. And the true disciple of Jesus will walk in this way. If he finds that some action of his, which he has liberty to do, is going to cause stumbling to others, he will give it up. Lest we give them offense, he says, we'll pay the tax. How does he pay it? Go to the sea and throw in a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you'll find a stater. Take that and give it to them for you and me. Oh, here we see something very wonderful. Jesus would never do a miracle for himself. He never turned the stones into bread for himself, but he was willing to multiply the loaves for others. And here it was a question of paying the tax not only for himself, but also for Peter, who needed to pay that tax. And Peter had forsaken everything to follow Jesus. And Jesus was going to help Peter pay his tax. That's a wonderful thing for us to learn. Do you know that God wants you to pay your tax? All your taxes? When you avoid paying your taxes, you're going against the will of God. But you don't have to be burdened about that, because the Lord wants to help you to pay your tax. He's going to give you the money to pay your taxes. That's wonderful. He doesn't want you to avoid paying your taxes. At the same time, He's going to help you, if necessary, supernaturally, to pay your taxes. That's a wonderful message we get from this passage. Go to the sea and take the first fish that comes up. And Peter was going to experience something that he had never experienced in all the years in which he had been fishing. He was going to find money in the mouth of a fish. How wonderful God is. Now, there was a treasurer that the apostles had. Judas Iscariot was the treasurer. But Jesus didn't send Peter to Judas Iscariot. Let Judas Iscariot and Peter get into a conflict. He said, don't go to Judas. I'll provide that need another way. Go and pick up a fish from the sea. And you'll find enough there in the mouth of the fish to pay your tax and mine. What a beautiful picture of partnership. The Lord meets our need, and the Father who met the need of Jesus, the financial need of Jesus, supernaturally, also met the financial need of Peter, supernaturally. This is a wonderful message that we get in the New Covenant. If Jesus could walk on the water, Peter could walk on the water too. And if the Father was going to meet Jesus' financial need supernaturally, He was going to meet Peter's financial need supernaturally too. That is the wonderful message of the New Covenant. And that's a word of encouragement for us, that what God did for Jesus in His earthly life, He will do for us. As He cared for Jesus in His earthly life, He will care for you and me, if we are His disciples and if we have forsaken everything to follow Him like Peter did. You'll find that God never lets you down. He never lets His servants or His disciples down. There need never be that fear in our hearts. If necessary, supernaturally, He will provide our need, even the need to pay our taxes. If we can walk in the way that Jesus walked, of not standing up for our rights and privileges, but being willing to give them up because we do not want to cause offense to others. If you find yourself in a situation where you have to give up a certain right or a privilege for the sake of others, and because of that you suffer some loss or some inconvenience, you can be sure that God in heaven, who watches that, will more than make up for that need. And now we come to chapter 18 and verse 1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Here Jesus had spoken about Himself as the Son of God, and the Son of God being exempt from paying tax. Is He the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked Him this question. And Jesus explained who was the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In verse 2, He said, He called a child to Himself and stood him in their midst and said, I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. The disciples thought this is wonderful, to have such an honor, to be a son in the kingdom of heaven. But Jesus said that it is the spirit of a child that makes a person great in the kingdom of heaven. And unless you are converted, now these disciples had already forsaken everything in order to be disciples of Jesus. But although they were converted in one sense, they had revelation concerning Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God. They had forsaken their earthly jobs. They had forsaken earthly security. Yet they needed another conversion. That teaches us something very significant. There may be many things that we have given up for the Lord, and yet you and I may need another conversion if we have not become like little children in our attitude, in our spirit. For he spoke about another conversion. And I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven belongs to those who have understood what it is to come like a little child. And the one thing we know about little children is their helplessness. A little child is helpless. Whoever then humbles himself, verse 4, as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. It's not the one who does miracles, but the one who humbles himself. And to humble oneself means to become like a little child, to have that attitude of helpless dependence upon the Father, accepting everything that the Father allows into our life. That is humility. Helplessly dependent upon the Father for the provision of all our need. That is humility. If we are not willing to come to Jesus like that, it says we cannot enter. And the more we are like that little child in helplessness and in humility, in helpless dependence upon the Father, the greater we are in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is, of course, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And when he says that the one who humbles himself as a child is the greatest, it's obvious that Jesus also humbled himself as a little child. Let's get our understanding right. Greatness in the kingdom of heaven is dependent on how childlike we are in our spirit.